Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you, and enjoy watching. A woman living on a small Australian island mysteriously disappeared before meeting with her parents. The police quickly joined the case and began to unravel a rather strange tangle of clues and leads. The situation was complicated by the fact that nothing like this had happened on this island for more than 100 years, and the police were completely unprepared for such a thing. In the end, they still managed to find out a very unexpected truth, but along with it, even more questions appeared. Janelle Patton was born on June 30th, 1972 in Sydney, Australia. She was the only child in the family, and the girl's parents gave her all their attention and love. From childhood, she was fond of music. The girl played the piano and clarinet and was also a member of the school music group. After graduating from school, Janelle entered university to become a doctor. But after a year, she decided to leave her studies and focus on work. She got a job at a bank and over the next few years built her career. However, over time, Janelle began to understand that life in a big city with all the accompanying difficulties and problems was having a very negative effect on her, and the woman began to think about moving. In October 1999, when she was 27, she decided to move to a small island called Norfolk. It was located almost 1,500 miles from Australia, but was part of it. At the same time, in those years, local laws were enforced there, and there was their own customs, so the island was considered a rather independent place. The population of Norfolk was only about 2,000 people, so all the locals knew each other quite well. In addition, due to the great remoteness from civilization, new people appeared there quite rarely, with the exception of tourists. The island was popular with both residents of Australia and New Zealand, which was located a little closer. Janelle quickly found a job at a local hotel, got acquainted with the island's residents, and over time, joined their measured way of life. The atmosphere of Norfolk resembled life in a small town, reinforced by the fact that for many hundreds of miles around the island, there was nothing but the ocean. For this reason, all its inhabitants tried to get along with each other because they had no other choice, by and large. At the end of March 2002, a year and a half after the move, Janelle's parents decided to visit their daughter, and the woman was looking forward to this meeting. They flew to the island on May 30th, and throughout the day, Janelle showed them the main attractions of Norfolk and also introduced them to the island's residents. The next day, she had a morning shift at the hotel, and she and her parents planned to meet immediately after work. Janelle rented a small house on the territory of a local resident, and there was no room for two people there. For this reason, the woman booked a hotel room for her parents. The next morning, Janelle finished work at about 11 o'clock and went for her daily walk. She regularly walked along a small route from her home to the observation deck on the edge of the island. Her parents were expecting their daughter to come to the hotel around noon, but Janelle was clearly delayed. At first, they thought that the woman might have had some urgent business, so they decided not to waste time and go for a walk. Before leaving, they left a note for their daughter at the door, but when the parents returned at 2:30, this note was still there. Realizing that Janelle had not come for them, the parents began to worry. They tried to call her, but the woman did not pick up the phone. All this looked rather strange. The parents did not understand where their daughter could have disappeared on a small island and were worried that something might have happened to her. They went to her house and found that the front door was unlocked. However, this was not something unusual for Norfolk. Local residents rarely locked their doors, since crimes were practically never committed on the island. Inside the house, there was neither Janelle herself nor any evidence that something bad could have happened to her. Her car was also parked nearby. While the parents were in the house, one of their daughter's friends drove up there. They said that they could not contact Janelle all day, and the woman offered to drive along the route that Janelle walked almost every day. The three of them examined the entire route, but she was not there either. Then the parents returned to their hotel and told the manager what was happening. He made several calls, asking various people if they had seen Janelle, but this also did not bring results. By that time, it was already around 8 in the evening, and the woman's parents decided to call the police. They said that they could not find their daughter all day, and the officers asked them to come to the station. There, the police informed them that just an hour before their call, a tourist from New Zealand found a body near a waterfall. She noticed some large black bag and came closer, where she saw that human hands were sticking out from under the bag. The police arrived at the scene and found the body of a woman. She had many visible injuries, and some of her clothes were missing. At the time of Janelle's parents' visit to the police, the officers had just begun to inspect the crime scene, so they immediately assumed that the deceased might be their daughter. At the same time, the investigators decided to call Janelle's neighbor, from whom she rented the house, for identification, so as not to subject her parents to such an ordeal. The woman came to the place and immediately confirmed that the deceased was indeed Janelle. The police handed over the body to medical experts, but after a visual examination, they already understood that most likely they were dealing with a murder. The island's residents were shocked by this news. The last murder there occurred in 1893, and less serious crimes were also very rare. The local police practically did not encounter anything more serious than fights and domestic brawls, but now they had to look for a killer. For this reason, they immediately requested help from Australian investigators, and they flew to the island. Medical experts found 64 injuries on the victim's body, including abrasions and cuts left by some sharp object like broken glass. In confirmation of this version, they found particles of glass in Janelle's hair, which apparently belonged to a broken bottle. In addition, bruises were found on the victim's wrists, as if someone was holding her by the arms. At the same time, experts admitted that the victim could have been held at the very moment when the injuries were inflicted on her. This indicated that there could have been several criminals. Along with the cuts left by the glass, there were also wounds consistent with a knife. Forensic scientists found microscopic particles of green and white paint on Janelle's body. They were also present on her clothes and in her hair. According to the experts, the paint could have gotten on the victim's body directly from the criminal or his car, for example, when he was getting rid of the body. At the same time, experts could not find any traces of abuse, although the partially missing clothing indicated this motive. However, they managed to find a foreign DNA sample on the victim's body, but it belonged to some unknown woman. The situation was complicated by the fact that at about 3:30 in the afternoon, a short but very heavy rain fell on the island. It could have washed away important clues, such as footprints, blood, and other biological samples. At the same time, the rain made it possible to determine that the criminal hid the victim's body even before it began. There were puddles on the black oilcloth, which means that Janelle had been lying there for at least 3 hours until she was found. While experts tried to find at least some clues, the police began to reconstruct the chronology of the victim's last hours. They found out that after work, the woman went to the store, after which she headed home. At the same time, the owner of the house arrived there and saw Janelle heading for her daily walk. About 10 minutes later, another local woman drove along this road in a car and saw Janelle there. The next witness, who lived almost at the end of this route, also noticed the woman. This time, she was standing next to a white car and talking to the driver. According to the witness, it seemed to her that there were 2 men in the car, but she allowed that there could be only one. 5 minutes later, 2 witnesses living near this road heard something like a baby crying in the distance. Another man heard a scream, but when he went outside to check what was happening, the sounds had already subsided. Thus, the police found out that the victim was attacked at about 11:45 in the morning, that is, only half an hour after the end of her work shift. Having not received a single significant clue, they decided to send the black oilcloth in which Janelle's body was wrapped to the mainland so that it could be examined with the help of advanced devices. Sometime later, they got the result. The experts found 10 different fingerprints on it at once, but they were all partially smeared. Despite this, the detectives still decided to try to find a match. They compiled a list of all the people who were on the island on the day of the murder and received more than 2,700 names, including local residents and tourists. The police asked all people between the ages of 15 and 70 to voluntarily provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, but only half responded to this request. Among the 1,300 fingerprints, the experts could not find a single match. As a result, the investigators decided to focus on the search for possible suspects among Janelle's acquaintances, and her diary helped them a lot in this. The woman regularly wrote about what was happening on the island and about the relationships between its inhabitants. Having studied the diary, the police found quite a lot of interesting things there. It turned out that Janelle had a rather tense relationship with one of her friends. When she first moved to the island, this woman helped her find temporary housing in the house of her acquaintance. However, Janelle did not stay there for long. Apparently, they had some disagreements, but even after she moved out, this man behaved rather suspiciously. Several witnesses said that once he threatened Janelle right in the middle of the street. The police also found out that after the body was found, he asked his friend to say that he had spent the whole day with him, although this was not true. Investigators were never able to find out why this man behaved in this way, but they did find out something. Apparently, he was in a secret relationship with that same friend who had a husband and children. Janelle mentioned this in her diary, and perhaps the couple did not like the fact that she found out about their relationship. Despite this, they both provided their fingerprints, which did not match the samples from the black bag. The police also searched their homes and cars, but could not find any clues. The next suspect was a man with whom Janelle had been in a relationship for 9 months. He was also checked for possible involvement, but again, the police could not find any evidence. In addition, several other people were mentioned in the diary with whom Janelle had tense relations, but all of them agreed to submit their fingerprints and DNA. At some point, the police even considered the victims' parents as suspects, since the murder occurred the day after their appearance on the island, but no evidence was found for this version either. Since then, there has been no progress in this case. For many months, the police tried to find new suspects, re-examined the available evidence, but all this led them to a dead end. At some point, they announced a substantial reward in the amount of $300,000 for information on this case, but all the received clues did not bring them closer to catching the culprit. 2 years later, the investigators resumed the investigation, and first of all, they decided to review the collected fingerprint samples. In addition, they added to them all the fingerprints collected from suspects in other cases that occurred on the island in recent years. All these fingerprints were stored on paper, so the experts had to compare each of them manually. This process took quite a long time, but eventually the detectives received a long-awaited call. The fingerprints of one of the suspects in another case matched 2 fingerprints found on the black oilcloth in which Janelle's body was wrapped. This person was 26-year-old Glen McNeil. Shortly after Janelle's murder, police questioned him on suspicion of breaking into someone else's house, but it did not come to an arrest. Despite this, the man's fingerprints were still taken, and since then, they have been stored in a file with this case. The police also found out that in 2002, McNeil had a white Honda, and as we remember, a witness saw the victim next to a similar car just a few minutes before her death. Another curious fact was that the man left the island shortly after the murder. He moved there from New Zealand in 2000 with his wife and got a job as a cook, but later they divorced, which also happened shortly before leaving. At the time of the investigation, McNeil lived in New Zealand with his new wife and 2 children, so it was very problematic for the police to interrogate him. Nevertheless, they understood that the man was unlikely to take the car with him from the island and decided to try to find it so that criminologists could inspect it for any clues. Soon, they really succeeded in this. The white Honda that McNeil drove was abandoned on someone else's property among the thickets, and it was handed over to experts. Investigators also requested a search warrant for the house in which he lived during his stay on the island. Having studied every millimeter of the car interior, experts found particles of white and green paint that matched the particles found on the victim's body. There were also several glass shards, and exactly the same ones were found in his former home. Detectives invited an expert who found that these samples, as well as shards from the victim's body clothing, not only match 100%, but were melted at the same time for one type of product. They also found a small part of the engraving on one of the shards, which turned out to be the name of the wine. Thus, the specialists confirmed that all three types of shards were obtained from one wine bottle. In the yard of McNeil's former home, police found a black oilcloth of the same type in which the body was wrapped. In addition, several human hairs were found in the trunk of his car, as well as biological traces. However, both of these clues degraded over time, and it was not possible to extract DNA samples from them. Then the detectives decided to send these hairs to a laboratory located in the USA, since they had the most advanced analysis tools. This process dragged on for a whole year. The first laboratory was overloaded, and for a long time they could not start the analysis. As a result, one of the investigators had to fly to the USA and transfer the hair to another laboratory. In early 2006, the police finally received the result. Experts were able to establish that the hair did indeed belong to Janelle. Putting together all the available evidence, the detectives obtained an arrest warrant for the man and went to New Zealand, where they took him into custody. McNeil was deported to Australia and officially charged with murder. During the very first interrogation, he unexpectedly, for the investigators themselves, began to give confessions. According to the man, that morning he smoked weed and went for a ride around the island in a car. At some point, he reached down for a dropped cigarette pack, lost sight of the road, and crashed into something. At first, McNeil thought he had hit some animal, but as soon as he got out of the car, he saw a human body under it. Panicking, the man loaded it into the trunk and went home, where he took illegal substances for several hours. Soon, he heard some sounds coming from his trunk and realized that the woman was still alive. Then he took a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her several times. After committing the act, McNeil wrapped the body in oilcloth and took it to the waterfall. Despite the confession, the detectives immediately realized that the man was lying. Almost all his words diverged from the real facts. Medical experts who examined Janelle's body were sure that the injuries sustained were completely inconsistent with being hit by a car. In addition, McNeil's version did not explain the bruises on the wrists, the puncture wounds from the shards, and the fact that someone took off some of her clothes. Moreover, if the man had really stabbed her several times when the victim was in the trunk, there would have been traces of blood that the experts could not have missed. But they were not there. The police tried to get the truth by pointing out all these facts, but McNeil continued to insist on his version. As a result, they decided to refer this case to the court, and the process began in the summer of 2006. It took place on the island, and the jurors were selected from among the local residents. McNeil immediately stated that he had nothing to do with the murder and did not even remember giving the police any confessions. He explained this oblivion by the fact that he had serious mental problems, although there was no medical confirmation of this statement. Nevertheless, by the time the trial began, the detectives had managed to dig up something interesting. They understood that McNeil's lawyers would cling to the fact that female DNA was found on the victim's body. It was present not only on Janelle's clothes, but also under her nails. This could indicate that the victim managed to scratch this woman before her death, which means that she could have been directly involved in the murder. After McNeil's arrest, investigators talked to all of Janelle's acquaintances and asked if there was any connection between them and the victim. One of her friends remembered that just 2 or 3 weeks before her death, Janelle asked her if she knew a woman named Alicia and her husband, Glen McNeil. She answered that she did not know them personally, but had seen them, and Janelle changed the subject of conversation. The same friend said that she was working at a hotel on the day of the murder. At some point, she saw Alicia on the street. The woman was covered in something red, and she asked her if she was okay. Alicia was clearly disturbed by something, but she replied that it was just paint and walked away. The witness, for some reason, did not feel the need to tell the police. Then she simply did not see any connection to the murder of Janelle and only remembered it after the police asked about McNeil and his wife. Alicia was subpoenaed as a witness and stated that she had nothing to do with the murder. Remarkably, this friend of the victim later changed her testimony and stated that a certain 6-member religious cult was behind her murder. This came as a big surprise to the investigator, and all past testimony was automatically called into question. McNeil himself continued to deny any involvement in the murder, insisting that he had absolutely no recollection of his confession. Nevertheless, with the available body of evidence, the jury found him guilty, and on March 9, 2007, the man was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Even though the case was brought to a close, many continued to question McNeil's guilt. According to the most popular version, based on witness testimony and injuries, the man may not have acted alone. Either he committed the murder together with someone, or he helped someone dispose of the body. A few years after the trial ended, McNeil suddenly claimed that he actually knew who killed Janelle. It was a man who had been selling him illegal substances. According to McNeil's new story, he was in his home that morning when suddenly this man came to him along with his wife. He said he had a human body in his trunk and demanded that McNeil get rid of it or else he would hurt him and his wife. Frightened, he complied with this demand. The man dragged the body to his trunk, wrapped it in oilcloth, and drove it to the waterfall. He also added that he used medical gloves, but investigators noticed a discrepancy. There were several prints on the oilcloth that belonged to him that would not have been left by using gloves. In addition, the man said he buried the gloves in his yard after the crime, and police searched the property, but there were no gloves. However, McNeil gave them the name of the man who allegedly killed Janelle, and he was indeed suspected of selling illegal substances. In addition, the police requested McNeil's phone history and saw that he regularly called the man. However, this could only mean that McNeil was simply buying goods from him. In the years that followed, several other theories about the case emerged, each of them highly dubious and contradictory. For example, some media outlets even put forward the theory that Janelle was a secret informant for the police, and this could have been the real motive for the murder. However, no serious corroboration of this or all other theories has ever been found. On February 1, 2024, McNeil was released from prison early and deported to New Zealand. There, he would still be under observation for some time while his probation lasted, but in fact, he was already on the outside. All these years, he has continued to stick to the story that other people committed the murders. Perhaps someday, he will once again change his story, and we will learn the whole truth. Until then, there will remain many questions in this case. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to put a like under this clip if you liked it. It was located almost 1,500 miles from Australia, but was part of it. The atmosphere of Norfolk resembled life in a small town, reinforced by the fact that for many hundreds of miles around the island, there was nothing but the ocean. Thank you for watching this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your comments on this situation. That was Detective STARBORN. See you soon.